Pleasure to be with you here tonight. I'm actually here in Israel, so that's why it's nighttime for me. But let me go ahead and share my screen and talk to you a little bit about my process and talk to you about kind of what we created here through our work in Tree of Life. We're going to be talking about sort of the dance of the Holocaust, and we'll be talking about more than just Marcel Marceau's piece, but also Francesca and Edith Egger, and also Ilse Weber, which was the composer to the piece that we performed. The flow of tonight is going to be more than just showing you the pieces. It's also going to be me talking about kind of the process, the creative process in trying to communicate your stories, trying to communicate kind of the message that's meant behind each one of them. Marcel Marceau and Edith Egger both survived, whereas Francesca and Ilse did not. So how does that kind of impact the creative process? I'll talk about what I did personally in my process to create it, what I'm trying to communicate in each one, and then sort of the reflections that came about it. I know there's already been an introduction about me, but I'll just reiterate slightly. Professional dancer and choreographer, among other things. Born in Israel, lived in the US, now back to Israel. I've spoken about the Holocaust because I'm a third-generation Holocaust survivor. So I've actually spoken in Japan, for example, about my grandmother's story. And Holocaust is kind of very near and dear to me, which has really kind of driven my involvement in We Are the Tree of Life and all the amazing work being done here. So before we get started, I think it's best to kind of take a step back and just talk about dance. Art can take many forms, from visual to musical to dance, right? So the physicality of it lets dancers communicate and express themselves in a new way. And it also allows us to connect with people slightly differently, right? So we're taking a step back from kind of vocal communication, from me saying what I want to say, into more of me kind of showing you what I want, the way I'm moving, and leaving it up to you to sort of interpret and take from it what you will. And the beauty of it is it kind of allows a lot more individuality from the performer, but also allows it to become kind of subjective and individual for the viewer. So kind of the beauties in the eye of the beholder. So that's a big part of dance. It's, again, silent. We're not telling you the answer. We're showing you something that means something to us. And then it's up to you to take from it what you will, interpret it in your own way. Now, if I take kind of a step back and talk about the choreography part, specifically, choreography involves more than just the dance, right? There's the physical movement, and that's great, but there's also the musicality you have to respect, the actual location. You'll see the three pieces were each filmed in a different place, and that's kind of a part of the overall message. And then choreography, in my mind, powerful choreography is really communicate some sort of story, or ideally really an emotion. So a part of our discussion today is going to be the emotions I'm trying to bring up, maybe the emotions that brought up in me, and it's gonna kind of take us through the creative process. So we know slightly about these people already from the introduction, but I'll just reiterate so we can see kind of how it comes into the choreography and kind of the lenses of what I'm trying to communicate. So of course we have Edith Egger. She was a dancer herself. She had to perform for Dr. Mengele, but she was fortunate enough and strong enough to survive the Holocaust. And within this choreography, the music that we're going to be hearing is actually by Ilse Weber. We actually didn't hear so much about her story, but she was a poet and a musician. She mostly wrote children's stories in German. And she actually volunteered to go to Auschwitz with her son, among other children. Yeah, she's a very powerful individual, and she didn't make it. She perished in Auschwitz. So my personal process in trying to create this piece was a little bit of both, right? I wanted to communicate Edith Egger's story, but also pay tribute to Ilse Weber and the music that we're hearing. In my journey, it was actually, I was fortunate enough to have a long conversation with Edith, understand her values, and understand what kind of the Holocaust is to her, right? If we're talking about the Holocaust for Ilse, for example, that was it. That was kind of the end of her life. It was entirely consumed by the Holocaust, and that's where she perished. Whereas Edith, it was a part of her life that forever shaped the rest of her life. So I'm sort of trying to keep that context within this piece, and not just say kind of this is the Holocaust, but take it in kind of a grander view, because this is a person's life. And she's still alive and still doing amazing things. But this piece is actually, you'll see within the three pieces, two of them are about people who survived. And that sort of context, the Holocaust was a part of their life, and the way it shaped them moving forward is something I'm trying to include and communicate here. So without further ado, I think the best is to show you the first piece. I'll show it to you locally so we have the best quality we can get. Okay, so we can talk about that piece slightly. I'll stay in this mode so you can see, and we can maybe jump back to the piece and discuss it. There's a lot I was trying to communicate in here. There's a lot of pieces I'm playing with. One is, of course, the location between kind of the stranded room to the rooftop with the view to Tel Aviv. And that all comes back to, back to kind of context. Like the Holocaust was a part, but then there's, of course, the thing after, right? The rest of her life. And personally, from my conversations with her, a big part of it was she tried to find kind of strength through the suffering and not let her weigh her down throughout her life. Okay, she kept growing from it, and that she kind of uses it now. She's moved on to psychology work and all the powerful work that she's doing now. And in a way, her traumatic experiences helped her grow. As terrible as the Holocaust was. So a little bit about kind of how I did it. Of course, I listen to the music. I try and take it apart. I find motifs. For example, there's a whole head movement part that eventually kind of grows into the arms. And that's meant to kind of show the escalation of the process. And of course, World War II was not a brief moment. People who experienced it, it was years and years of being in a concentration camp. So it's not, maybe we talk about it kind of in an instance, but again, we're talking about years, talking about someone's kind of very deep experiences and the way it shaped them. And for her, we're talking about losing people you cherished, but having to kind of keep going, right? So it's kind of the left and right with the head was meant to communicate something along the lines of like looking for the individuals. Many people after the Holocaust didn't know what happened to their loved ones, didn't know if they made it, if they didn't make it, whether to look, whether to not to look. It was a very challenging reality. So I tried to kind of capture that. And then within, of course, the dancing, there was also the part with the hands, and she accredits her survival to effectively that dance in front of Dr. Mengele, and the fact that he gave her a piece of bread that she then shared. And the people she shared it with actually helped her in the end when she was very close to death. So it's the idea of kind of reaching out to people, connecting. I personally wrote a little bit of reflections for myself that might be interesting to share. For example, I guess the first one here, I personally worked in context around the Holocaust in different ways, and I've actually recently moved to Israel, so a year ago now. But just the idea of dealing with the Holocaust and anything related to the Holocaust when I was in the US, I was kind of faced that kind of victimized, kind of powerless kind of feeling. Whereas when I work kind of here in Israel, I feel much more kind of united and empowered. So I don't know if that shows in this piece or not. But in that sense, even just the location of where I made the choreography really impacted it. And then there's, I talked about contextualizing it, but even in the end where it finishes kind of with the look over and the camera sighting over, we'll see that actually at the very end too in Marseille's piece, but it's the idea of it happened, but life just kept going for her, right? And as much as kind of we maybe experience tragedy, life doesn't really care and keeps going and keeps growing, and kind of the context of what we experience changes with every year that passes. So I sort of tried to communicate that within here. And the motif, I say here, motif of moving your legs was the fact that you have to keep going. And that was something that, again, for me, was really strong in the ideas as I put this together. I was really trying to kind of put in my head of what it was like, not just the idea of the Holocaust, but going through it day after day for years, and forcing yourself, or reality forcing you to, but the idea of like moving forward no matter what, just because you don't have the choice. That's kind of where the legs kind of kept moving, and then the head movement came with it. Because as you're moving, of course, you're still looking, you're still, I say here, you're either looking for ones you've lost, looking for new individuals. There's kind of life is within a greater context of people. And as much as many people that were lost, life kept going. And she had to find new people, and of course she built her own beautiful family. And now she has beautiful grandkids. But that's something that I was trying to communicate. And then it also connects back to Ilse Weber, that had the people around her, right? The looking and the connecting. She had her son, but she didn't let go. I don't know if that's the right way to phrase it. I can't quite communicate. She did something very, very powerful, very strong, but she actually went with her son and with the kids. And if you can try and imagine those moments for them, and her like wholehearted devotion towards kids, from the story she wrote for kids to actually sacrificing her life at the end to be around kids, to try and make that last part of their lives slightly more, I don't know, more manageable. I don't have a good word to say it. Everything that happened there is, of course, a tragedy. But that's also something I was trying to communicate. The fact that this is a piece about Edith's experiences, but her experiences often connect to people, right? Whether it connected to Dr. Mengele and how horrible he was, to the people that she shared that bread with and how they helped carry her on later on. This might make slightly more sense if you read her story and get to know it slightly more. But there is kind of for me, there's a strong element here of trying to not alone, not being alone, connectedness, connecting to people. So that's a big part of a lot of the movements here. and especially the kind of the motif of the, well, you can't see my legs, but the motif of the legs with the head is the moving and the connecting. And then in the last part of the general kind of notes I wrote to myself in reflection afterwards, connect it back to kind of what it means to survive and not to survive. So each individual that didn't survive, the whole world is lost, right? Their kids, that will never happen. Their kids' kids, grandkids, all of that is cut off. And that was actually something powerful in talking to Edith and kind of appreciating for her winning was survival, and the fact that she had kids and had grandkids. But it kind of makes you appreciate, or kind of weighs on you all those that were lost, right? All the innocent, all the young, all the artists, all the composers, all the daughters, all the sons, people that were lost, and then the future generations that they could have led that were also lost. So something I kind of had in mind through the movements. I don't know if it's very clear to see some of the movements in the product were more kind of internal to me in dealing with some of the thoughts. Yeah, we can keep going to the next piece. So Francesca Mann, as we talked about, she's very famous in that she's kind of the ballet killer. You'll see it in the movement very clearly, but the way her story unfolds is she used her background in dance and movement to supposedly seduce the guards while she was undressing, and then use that opportunity to grab a rifle and of course shoot down two Nazis. That's a very powerful way to go. That's a good way to phrase it. She committed to, yeah, she committed to speaking up till the very end. And I try and show that slightly in the piece, but I was just, as I worked on this piece, one, she didn't make it, right? So there's no context for me to try and reference, right? There's no rest of her life for her to look back on the Holocaust about. That wasn't there. That isn't part of her story. So in the process of making this piece, I really tried to understand what she went through, right? You're talking about an individual that went through something similar to 6 million Jews perished. So something similar to many, many others. But instead of giving into helplessness and hopelessness and adjusting and going through the motions everybody else did, she took it in a completely different direction, right? And she fought back, and she was not silent, and she became kind of a legend thereafter. But I personally tried to kind of experience that and see if I can try and understand maybe what she went through from like in a physical way, right? You're talking about she was a performer like myself, so she knew what it was like to be on stage, but this is not quite that, right? You're performing in front of people who are going to kill you, and just the heartbeat of, yeah, her heartbeat, the breathing, everything she had to experience, rush of adrenaline in those final moments, knowing that what she's about to do, there's no one in the right mind would think that they would do this and survive. That wasn't actually an option, but she did it anyway. Even if perhaps there was some thought that, okay, if I don't do this, maybe there's a way that I will survive later on. She still decided to do this, right? So that speaks kind of the strength of the individual and the character. So that's stuff that I tried to capture in this. But you'll see in this piece, I go ahead and I almost act out her story. And actually, we'll see, I have two different renditions of this. I'll show you both, and then we'll actually slightly talk about why in the end we used the one and not the other. So I'll show you this one first. Okay, yeah, before we jump to the second rendition of this, just talk about a little bit of the artistic choices behind it. I'll explain some of the elements, as I'm sure you saw. I tried to physicalize and show apparently she undressed seductively, and that's how she was able to get close to them. I can't imagine being in that scenario where you're facing the circumstances that she was, and yet you still have to force yourself to be seductive to those Nazis around her. So that's what I tried to show here. Of course, the physicality of kind of opening the shirt, lifting up the leg, the movement that was meant to be kind of gentle in a totally unfit place. And then it's said that she kind of performed for them. So that was kind of a homage to her ballet background. She was a very accomplished performer and a dancer. And at first she was fooled into thinking that she was one of the artists that was going to be saved and not even sent to the concentration camps, but that didn't happen. And then there's also an element here of the music, right? As I kind of lift up the pants of the leg and I stand on a chair, I try to physicalize kind of her and her presence in that moment. And the fact that it starts silent, which is meant to be uncomfortable. It's slightly uncomfortable to watch dance in silence. But that was, again, the context of where she was, right? She wasn't performing on a stage with music. She had to do this kind of improvise on the fly to try and kind of achieve her objective of snatching the gun. And then I also try and kind of reference what I imagine would have been her physical experience, from the heartbeat to the breathing. You can see at the end, kind of you hear the breathing, and then of course you hear the breathing stop. But I try to, as much as I can, kind of show what she went through in those moments, or at least my interpretation, my imagination of what she went through from my research into her story. So you can see there's like three different pieces into this, right? There's her coming in, undressing seductively, her performing, and then her fighting back, and which of course led to the chair. I'll show the second version of this, just so you can see the contrast. This was originally, what I just showed you was actually the rehearsal footage, and then this was the footage we were going to release. Yeah, so I'll explain a few more elements while we're here. And for example, just a choice with the chair being down and having to lift the chair and position it properly. That was meant to reference the fact that she was doing this in an environment that was completely unsuited for what she was doing. and she had to kind of make do and improvise and reimagine the space for herself, and to, again, fulfill what she was intending to do. And then you can even hear sort of the breathing. Actually, I start breathing here at a very specific spot, and you can see it's actually before the choreography is done, right? There's that segment of ballet, and you can start hearing the breathing then. And the idea was, this wasn't planned, right? She didn't know where she was going to be and plan it out and take steps and, let's say, rehearse in a way. This was all on the fly. This was her in the moment, deciding what was going to happen in the next moment. So for me, in this breathing, I was trying to maybe sort of communicate that this, even while performing, she was only then forming the next thought, right? This is before kind of you have that hand gesture of the gun, but you can already hear the breathing. That's kind of the idea that the thought is now forming in her head, and the implication of just the physical implication of that thought. And you can see that as I do the gesture of kind of pulling the trigger, there's no breathing, right? I imagined that going through that motion would have been so overwhelming, and whatever, in all the ways it would be, that her breathing would just stop, right? So of course, this is my physical interpretation of everything that she went through. This is lots of little elements I'm trying to communicate in this piece. And the idea is kind of this multi-sensory communication, right? There's the dance, taking off the actions of taking off your clothes, or opening the shirt, unrolling the pants, stuff that maybe we're familiar with from our day-to-day, but suddenly like in this new context. And then the way that we played with the music, and introduce the breathing. All these elements that are meant to ideally bring the person slightly into the state of mind that I imagine she would have been in during her heroic feats in this moment of her life, and kind of these very final moments of her life. And then the last thing to mention here was why we didn't go with this one. So I actually put a lot of work into trying to find a studio that would give us this sort of effect. And that was actually because this was out of context. Because when you see this, it almost comes off as a dream, right? The ultra white background. And this was very much in context, right? The other rendition that was the blue, we have it here. This is very much kind of in the context. This is a studio just for rehearsing, but the difference is that this kind of made it feel like it was a part of life. This happened within a life. Whereas this almost seemed in a dream. And the problem with it seeming in a dream was it suddenly put you in a state of mind that was, okay, maybe this didn't really happen, but this very much did happen, which is why we ended up going with this rendition that was in a somewhat messy studio that was kind of life. Real life was messy, and this happened in real life. It wasn't out there. So those are some of the choices here. And of course, within all my process, always I jot down notes. I try and figure out what I'm trying to communicate. And for her, it was trying to communicate her the strength of what she went through out of the millions who didn't make it, and were in similar circumstances. How did she have the will, the strength, the power to fight back? Yeah, so we're a little short on time, but that was some of the thoughts behind the creative process here. The last one we'll talk about today is Marcel, a relatively new piece. I think this is actually going to be the premiere of it. I don't know that it's been released before tonight's event. But what you see here is not Marcel, because this was not him, right? He came up with the name Marcel with his brother later on, when they joined the revolution, but this was him at like 17, like as a teenager. This was him before he became a famous mime. There's all these very famous videos displaying. Right? There's all these fantastic videos of Marcel as the world famous mime, the one that inspired Michael Jackson into kind of creating Michael Jackson's famous moonwalk. But this was not him. We're talking about him, talking about the person that would later become this famous mime. So that's kind of something I tried to keep in mind, the fact that this was a part of his journey into theater, into drama, was the Holocaust, right? It was him rescuing so many kids and exploring or utilizing the power of theater to completely disassociate with current reality, right? And give kids that comfort of, yes, they are kids going through the Holocaust, but through his amazing talent, even before he had this lifelong kind of journey into developing his techniques of mime, he was able to use theater and then pantomime to take them out of that context, right? There's amazing stories of him walking, saving kids and just walking and pretending that they're in Boy Scouts and crossing the border, passing Nazis and everything. And through the power of theater, keeping the kids' mental states in such a way that they could follow through with those amazing and heroic actions in a way that didn't arise any attention. There's of course more amazing stories. There's even a beautiful movie that came out about him that's very powerful. And if you Google it, there's endless videos about him and whatnot, stuff that we just can't get into now. But truly amazing individual, and it's really inspiring and curious to think that all this came from him exploring kind of the power of theater and pantomime during the Holocaust for kids. So that's something you'll see here. The idea here is not to communicate the Holocaust, but if anything, communicate disassociation with it. Yeah, take a look. So of course, the ending pose and the fact that it happened after the music, that all kind of goes back to the fact that he survived, right? He made it through the Holocaust, and this was actually a very formative part of his life. But he did something truly remarkable, and that's something I tried to communicate here, not so much through by focusing kind of on the horrors of the Holocaust, because that's really not what he did, right? His whole strength was, while going through those horrors, he created kind of a completely disassociative state for the kids that he worked with, right? And the fact that he made the whole experience as, I don't know if I'd say fun, as theatrical and unreal as possible. So instead of going through, there's even moments in the choreography, right? You're going on the table, let's say there's actual danger. He couldn't do it. He had to do it in a theatrical way, right? He had to, you can see, apologies, somewhere right here, right? You're going under the table, even if you do that, even if as you're scouting and you're on the lookout, all of it has to be in a way that was theatrical, that didn't give off fear, a way that would be almost playful for the kids, right? Even the small areas, right? Swimming on the table, a little character, right? The fingers walking with the music. It's again meant to, again, slightly pay homage to the fact kind of the march and them crossing the border, but more so communicate his exploration, right? We do that 3 times and you kind of explore it. And he's doing something when there's no manual, right? There's no one has done what he was doing. And a big part of what I'm trying to communicate in this piece is that he was figuring it out as he went. And that's his brilliance, that he was able to do such a fantastic job. But this is all stuff that he's exploring, right? In real time with the kids. I sort of do the beginning of kind of throwing the papers away as him saying, like, I'm not going to do this the traditional way, right? I'm going to go in a completely different way. I'm going to work with the kids and not tell them to, okay, go be quiet and careful, it's dangerous, and be fearful. I'm going to take in the opposite extreme. I'm going to create a moment for them that's almost kind of delightful in a game and theatrical, and create this kind of mental kind of headspace for them that would allow them to endure and experience a Holocaust in a completely different lens than I want to say almost anybody else could have thought of. That's his brilliance. Yeah, and you can see that kind of coming in. This was meant to be much less of a dancey piece and much more kind of exploratory, right? You see the same elements kind of come up again and again, and he or I, we're exploring the pieces. And of course, there's moments like this where you're feeling the weight, right? You're that was meant to show you just feeling the weight of the situation, but not letting yourself succumb to it. And even in that moment, play with the legs and make it playful, right? The ability to be there, but not be there, right? Go through everything you're growing, but not let yourself physically give into it, and create this kind of disassociative theatrical landscape for the kids. Again, like everything is, imagine everything he's going through and he's not letting himself go through it. Instead, he's going through it this is meant to be an innocent and playful piece, because that's what he had to create for the kids. So that's kind of some of what I tried to communicate here. Really trying to capture kind of the psychology for kids that he had to experience and really internalize through his journey, and truly amazing work that he did. About all the people that we talked about today, there's so much more that to be said, and this is a brief conversation between us here. I can attempt to scratch kind of their lives. There's so much more depth to all of it. But this is just a little bit of kind of my process here in trying to create pieces in their tribute, where each one is such a different story. Each one is so powerful in their own way. And you can see that what I was trying to communicate in each one was also different. Whether it's kind of the playfulness of, hiding on their table, then we're going to pick it up and dance with it because we're in front of kids and it needs to be playful, to the power of fighting your own instinct and going through this very powerful and brave action to, to the fact that context, life just keeps going. And even if you face such a terrible trauma and you lose the people around you, the people you cherish, life keeps going, and you don't have an option. And kind of the strength the sort of strength that is. So each one of them was incredibly powerful people in their own right, but it's very interesting to explore what sort of different strength each one of them had. That about summarizes my section about the choreographies. I think the last part is Father Nolt. You and I are going to chat for a bit, or if anybody has any questions, you can also continue to that.
Moose, thank you so much for that very powerful presentation. We are going to invite Father Tim Nolt to join us now in discussion with Tammuz. And I will just let everyone know, to give Father Tim and Tammuz enough time to offer their thoughts, we probably will go over that 1 hour mark. So we understand if you have to leave us, but would love for you to stay because we know that they have plenty to say. So I will add Father Tim here to the spotlight.
Good afternoon.
Here we go.
Hi, how are you?
So, good. I was real pleased to be asked to join this collaboration through Holly's husband, Richard, who is a friend of one of my friends, Anna Carney. We collaborate for 20 years now in chamber music. So Richard invited me to perform this piece, and I wasn't quite sure what the end result would be. I love collaboration, and I'm honored to be a part of this particular collaboration. It's very helpful to me to say yes to when opportunities arise. So Tammuz, I really appreciated how that turned out. I will say, I shared earlier, I was wrestling with this transcript. I have this very lyrical winds and strings going on in the background. And then I had never thought to ask why you preferred a piano recording of this rather than maybe a more orchestral version. Was there any particular reason for that?
Yes, the idea was limited resources, right? The fact that he went through everything he went through, it's not like he had the resources for, let's say, an orchestra in our case, but he had to he kind of made the most of his reality, right? Even with us, let's say I had a table and I had props and papers and whatnot. The amazing thing with mimes is, with him in particular, is he makes something out of nothing. So we're not quite as talented as him, as we have to use stuff, but I didn't want to go overboard and kind of distract from the piece by having a whole orchestral recording. I wanted to be as communicative and minimalistic as possible, because that's, for me at least, that's kind of the essence of pantomime. Marcel.
Very good.
Yeah, a lot of stuff at play here. It was a very fun challenge. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know we had some discussions ourselves and just the challenges of the reality they face, and then the way each one of them tackled it. I know we have this kind of extended motif of art of silence, which of course with him is very much felt because it's pantomime. But then it's also the opposite of what you do. It's the opposite of music. Silence is
Go ahead. If you're...
No.
Yeah,
please.
And one of the things that intrigues me about collaborating on a project like this is that, and I'd expressed some of this in our background conversations, my experience of the past year has been one of many voices, much chatter, many words. And it's refreshing to come into an endeavor in which we can find a way to communicate beyond the words. I think that for me, that's what faith is able to do. The signs, the symbols, the smells, the experience of liturgy or worship moves just beyond the words. And I think also as a performing artist, it's always been my great joy to be able to go beyond the words, to connect with people, to communicate something. And so I think that it's it's a rich opportunity for our world today. There are a lot of words, and people, I think they use words sometimes without pondering meaning. And I think that we also kind of skim over the opportunity to listen intently to the story of another person. There we find many rich treasures in the human experience. and in the spiritual life and in the human spirit. So for me to be able to embody certainly what I live in my faith as a priest, a Catholic priest, but as an artist, a musician, it's so refreshing to have an opportunity to embody things that go beyond words together with other people.
Yeah, no, it's I feel like in our modern day, maybe this was always the reality. This is the reality in the time period I'm alive. I feel like people are much busier talking rather than listening. And if we think about the Holocaust and all the voices that were lost, it's very peculiar and very interesting that he decided to not use his voice. Right, his art form was meant to communicate on a different level entirely and not get caught up in the talking and listening. But form of communication, it's much more, I'm going to say raw, kind of a level under, that typically helps people connect much more, right? And when we're talking, we're speaking, maybe not so much listening, it's much harder to connect and open up, at least in my mind. But going into the sort of physical landscape that he did, just bring something new out of people. And that was very kind of interesting to explore and work on together in this project.
Tammuz, I liked how you explored different aspects of this, kind of looking at how these different individuals use silence, and the art of silence is intriguing because we can ask many deep questions about who was silent, where's God, and all that type of thing. What intrigues me is our ability to remain powerful in silence. There's a word, meekness, that it's a virtue that I've come across recently that I see as misunderstood. And it's about this idea that it's love removed from anger, the ability to be present no matter what the situation is, and to be able to be active, to make a choice, even when there seems to be this coercive, oppressive force, we could call it evil, that is impinging and obliterating everything. There's something about the sacred and the divine that I think comes forward as we look at these embodiments of different ways of being silent but still active in the situation, and kind of begs the question of what remains at the end of the day of good and evil, if you want to ask that question, which is not something I want to answer today, because I don't have a particular answer for this discussion. But it's that ability to look at these individuals and say, wow, what can I learn about who they remained or chose to be in that situation? And the tremendous strength of character and the strength of the story, I think, is inspiring. As an aside, in my own faith tradition, it's the role of the saints. It's the role of those who would die for their faith. And many other traditions have those people who are willing to even give up their very life, as you mentioned today. So just some of my initial thoughts on the art of silence.
Yeah, I remember we talked about this previously as we explored these sort of thoughts, but the idea of how are we silent in our day-to-day, and how these individuals were not, right? And whether I'm not going to talk about God because I personally have an issue with his silence during that time period in our history. But the idea of taking action is not being silent, and the idea of thinking about taking action or not taking action, those are, for me, they're equivalent. They're both silence. And if we're talking about saints or not saints, and I don't know how you would want to put these people in what bucket, but it's very clear that they are people of action, right? And they're people that maybe were silenced through different circumstances, but refused to be silent, and weren't silent in the form of giving up or kind of succumbing to their reality, but yeah, refused to be silent, fought back, or endured in their own way, which I think is just a very powerful lesson for us to take into our daily lives, and the choices that we're making and choices that we're not making, and we're thinking about doing and we're not doing. Those are all kind of interpretations of us being silent. And I think stories of individuals like these that were silent yet not, right? Or silenced in some instances, but had the strength to speak their voice in kind of the broader sense, and take control and take action and navigate how they were going to act in this situation, and not, let's say, go with the flow. If that's right. If we go to Francesca Mann, just because she's the one stuck in my mind at the moment, she did not go with the flow. She was not silenced. She was not led where she wanted to be led. She led her own way. Yeah.
I don't know if anybody has questions or comments. I'm looking over in the chat box there. That's an opportunity to engage a little more in the conversation as well.
Yeah. Oh, and I'll say one more thing. The first two pieces are part of kind of longer releases. So if anybody's interested, there's also for Edith Egger and Nilsa Weber, there's like a full 11-minute video. I think it's 11 minutes or so. It includes an interview with Edith Egger, where she goes into more details, and it's really, really powerful to hear what she has to say and what she says, and how her whole perspective and take on what she experiences. Really fascinating, extremely powerful. And then also the piece about Francesca Mann is actually part of a much longer documentary, and also that one has a kind of an intro and an ending by me, where I talk a little bit about the reflection of their stories.
I might want to say something.
Please.
First of all, congratulations, Tammuz. It's absolutely beautiful. It's fantastic to have you here, Father Tim Nolt, and talking about all this subject, and seeing you willing to join the Tree of Life. But during your presentation, Tammuz, we heard from time to time some noise. I don't know if you heard them. And I hope it was just your little stuff sticking out from your ears, or your microphone. I don't know anything about all this stuff. But it took me back to a time where I was in Israel, and I don't know why I had the feeling that they were planes or they were missiles. I don't want to get political, but when you leave a situation of the past and you have to relive it, how do you control that again? Through your own reflections or through your own art of silence? Because that took me 2 periods of my life that I have to relate to, and where I do pursue as a grandmother and as a woman, or as a professional, or as an educator.
Yeah, so the noises you heard was, I think, like an ambulance or the police driving by. Yeah, actually, initially this was scheduled for earlier, but there was that Operation Gaza where Israel was under fire, and I was personally here in the, how do you say in English? Bomb shelter. Sorry, I lost the word. I was in a bomb shelter, which is its own sort of reality. So it's actually, I made this piece before that, but that also kind of impacts everything. Actually, yeah, impacts what kind of we experience something much, shorter, and of course, living under constant rocket threat is horrific in its own right, and tragically people died. But it is, let's say, a fraction of what people had to endure back then. So, facing tragedy just puts into context other tragedies.
Father Tim, we should be able, all of us coming from any faith. Okay, I remember when I was running the book festival, we invited Karen Armstrong to talk about a book, Jerusalem, the City of Three Faiths. We need people like you in all of those faiths to give us the strength through the performing arts or through anything else to be able to fight that and to get together. What are your thoughts there?
Oh, I appreciate them, and I agree with them. I don't think we have to look far afield to see how we struggle to stay together, even within a particular faith tradition. And for me, it comes down to some very simple things about keeping the central message in the forefront of whatever it is that I'm doing. And also I think that sense of knowing, realizing that I don't know, in my terms, I don't know all that God is up to. I don't know everything that he's doing. I know that I can respond. I can say yes. I can say yes to an opportunity that comes along. I can trust that his spirit is at work. And it's more important for me to find a way to continue to say yes and to move forward into the situation with people than to say no and to push people back in a way. And that might mean that I don't always have, I can say I don't know sometimes. I can say regarding a particular situation, a particular issue, I don't know, can we explore that together? I'm not going to give up my core values and my faith, but I'm going to want to move with. And again, I come back to Jackie, the role of real people. I mean, I see real faces here today. I don't know most of you, and I'm getting to know some of you just a little bit through our remote sessions, but it's a joy to have another face and a name and a different story to come together with. And it enriches my day, it enriches the experience of what I'm doing here with some other priests at this retreat center today. And so I agree, Jackie, it's very important to come together and to listen and to communicate honestly.
And if I can conclude, I will say yes. We are the Tree of Life is saying yes to your comment. I think we are going to keep going. I wanted to thank really from the bottom of my heart, the institution like the Lichtag Foundation, like the Shoah Foundation, like the Lotoro, Francesco Lotoro, that all those institutions who have supported us from the beginning, even when it was just an idea on paper, and to see all the performers who have agreed to come here, like you, Father Tim, like you, Tammuz, to close this program with the Jewish Community Center. And we are going to continue. And if I may, I want to say that we are already in action. We are going to be part of the UNESCO Holocaust Day of Remembrance in January 22nd, 2022, with as a theme the Tree of Life. We are still working on our long movie of 72 minutes, which is available for whoever to present it and to study it and to improve it and to make it the educational tool that we want. That means I'm just hoping to stay on a positive note. I am just hoping that all that is going to work. And we need to make it work. And if it doesn't work as well as we hoped to, we have to find something else. But we have to I never forget Elie Wiesel saying, we need to have a better world. I can hear his voice saying it. We need to have a better world. I want to say thank you to all
Jackie?
the attendees of all those sessions, to you guys. And I'm going to get back to you with something else. Don't worry.
If you want, though, somebody did ask what our thoughts are on the seemingly silent art forms and how they can have a wider social impact.
Please.
Maybe if we, I don't know if we want to discuss.
Tammuz, thank you for pointing that out. We'll take that last question and we'll hear Father Tim, your thoughts, and Tammuz, your thoughts, and then we'll wrap up for today.
Tammuz, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Yuval, for the question. So
my pleasure. Thanks for the talk.
If we going back to silent, right? Silent. I'm going to define silent art forms as art forms that are kind of above words. So if non-silent meant like a vocal communication, hardly have kind of words, there's kind of by definition a limit, right? Somebody's not going to fully connect, right? Maybe it's a problem of understanding, problem of interpretation, a problem of languages, like language barrier. The beauty of, let's say, a silent art form that's not specific to, words or language, maybe cultural specific, but I'll put that aside, is it's much more universal, right? Dance movement, you don't need to know a specific language. You don't need to be from a specific place. You don't need to know specific people for it to speak to you. And I think that's kind of the power of what we're doing here in We Are the Tree of Life, is trying to take this overarching topic of the Holocaust and bring it through sort of a different lens, a different domain, something that is less vocal, less words, and more into that kind of the silent art forms, which are again art forms that speak and communicate in a different way, kind of a different medium, something that's much more subjective, not in the creator, but also as a beholder, right? The audience take from it what they will. And in that way, because it's so, I'll say opaque, right? Because there's so much variance in the way people interpret it, it's a great way for people to connect over a topic in a way that's kind of individualistic and very open.
I would add that if I can encounter silence within myself, I can learn a little more self-possession. If I have an idea of faith, I leave more room for an encounter with God or the divine within. And as far as the arts and silence, it's kind of like the idea that young people that learn to read novels can develop a sense of empathy. It takes effort to read. It takes effort to be quiet during a symphony. It takes effort to not look at your phone if you're watching a choreographed piece on your computer. It takes some effort and some self-possession to become a better self, to become a better presence for others. And in the arts, we're training ourselves again, reminding ourselves of, hey, we want to be our best self for ourselves, perhaps for God, for others. And then we want to invite others to this sacred space. It's not a place necessarily of problem solving, but it's a place of being together, honoring one another. And from that place of whether it's empathy or a place of listening deeper within, I think we tap into deeper resources for, as Jackie said, helping to create a better world.
I agree 100%.
Well, thank you to both Tammuz and Father Tim for your powerful words and presentation today. It was a wonderful program, and I know everyone in the audience was appreciative. And thank you to Jackie Gamache, especially for being the powerhouse behind all of the We Are the Tree of Life programs that we've offered virtually this spring season. So kudos to you, Jackie. And as you announced before, there's more to come. So stay tuned in the network of Jackie Gamache for all that's to come from We Are the Tree of Life. And Jackie, you have one more thing to share, yes?
Yes, I almost forgot about it. I will be presenting my memoir to the Jewish Museum of Maryland tomorrow at 4 o'clock, if you are interested. It's talking really from my bomboloni time to my bagel time. And I have to say, I still prefer the bomboloni to the bagel. But it's going to be at the Jewish Museum of Maryland. If you go into web, it's going to be at 4 o'clock Pacific time. And that's it. Thank you to all. Really, thank you to all.
Thank you all very much for being
Everyone.
here. Have a great day.